Hey friends, Jared here with another review from Fanboys Forever, and today we'll be taking a close look at the new Super 7 Splinter figure from their new Ultimates line for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So I'm very excited and cannot wait to take a closer look at this really cool figure with you. First off, let's go ahead and have a look at the packaging. So we'll get Splinter out of the way here. And here we have the outer kind of shipper box that Splinter comes in. Pretty cool, just has the old logo on it, Splinter on the front, and on the back just some copyright info. And of course, not a toy! Don't you dare even think it's a toy! How could you? Outside of the shipper box, we have the sleeve that the figure comes in. Of course, these are really nice and embossed on the front, and each one of them are custom for whatever figure is in the wave, and this is the Splinter version. On the top, we have the Ultimates logo. And on the back, we have the classic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles logo with that classic font. Taking the cover off, and sometimes these are pretty hard to get off. And on the inside, we have the full packaging, and we can see that it just kind of has that sewer look to it, like some of those green bricks. Looks really neat, just has a little bit of graffiti. It looks exactly the same as the others in the series. At the top, we have a cool kind of decal applied with the Ninja Turtles logo, and the back we have the good guy leader, the bio, all about Splinter. So if you want to read that, there it is. We will start this review like we do all the others in the Ultimate Turtles line with a comparison. That's right, for these it is extremely important that everyone understands what these are going for. Of course, these aren't meant to be adaptations of the cartoon or a movie. These are supposed to be direct interpretations of those original action figures from Playmates back in the 80s and early 90s. It's so great to see these guys side by side because you get to see exactly that artistic intent that the designers were going for, and it just looks so cool to see it all come together. I know that Four Horsemen Studios is really big on this kind of thing. I know that they've described before how they kind of measure things out to get proportions exactly right from old figures. And you can see that so much love has went into just the head sculpt alone. You can see they have the snout is absolutely sculpted perfectly. They've actually done a little bit different with the ears. I think that was because they wanted to make it look more like a traditional Splinter. And of course, the original had very, very tiny ears. But from head on, it does look about the same. You can see the new one does have quite a bit more white on the top of the head. And I think that it depends on what version you had. What production run of that original Splinter. I think some did have quite a bit more white on the tops of the heads. So I think that, your mileage may vary on that part. You can see that we have the Tunic here, and they've matched the color pretty well. It's just about spot on. This is slightly more red, and this is slightly more pink. You can see that the gray is kind of done perfectly on the fur. The teeth are much more accentuated on this version. And then on the sides, the fur sculpting is just right on. They have that same kind of look to it. And the feet are very, very similar as well, with one difference that makes things a little bit more difficult with this guy. We'll get into that here in a little while. On the back, you can see we have the tail. And of course, this has an extremely similar tail as well. And just like it, they both kind of do start out brown and then go to gray, which is absolutely terrific. And those colors seem to match very, very well. I don't know, I was very surprised when I first saw this, because I guess I had just never really thought about the original Splinter toy kind of being its own entity before. In my head, I guess there was sort of an intersection between the cartoon design and the old action figure, and it never really struck me how it was sort of its own thing. And so it's so cool to see it realized in this larger format and to have that particular artistry of just being a toy, just being a figure first, based on those old comics. That's what's coming through here, not any sort of cartoon or movie influence. Now that we have Splinter on his own, we can have a very close look at the paint and sculpt detail that we can see here. And we're just going to start off with this head. Anytime you have a character with a really long snout, really long nose like this, it's kind of difficult to get good angles during your review because all the focus kind of goes to the front of the nose here, but I'll try to work around that by going to the side. You can see that we have all this fur in here that's just layered with all this great sculpting. We have the blank white eyes, which are of course a key feature of that original figure. And we have the ears that go back pretty far, a little bit further than that original toy. And on the back, we just have more of that fur. And then on the chin, we can see the gray actually continues from the neck. And we have Splinter's big old buck teeth right here. So that looks really nice. There appears to be almost some sort of, I don't know if it's like extra spray or paint wash here that's kind of got on the sides of the nose a little bit, but it does seem to be some sort of production imperfection. I'm not really sure if it's necessarily intentional, but it's there. Maybe Splinter has a slight cold. Moving on down, we have the Tunic, and there are two different versions of this Tunic, and we're going to look at that right after this. But I decided to start out with the sculpted version of the Tunic. Why did I start out with this? I really can't decide which one I like the best, but perhaps this is more keeping in line with the intention of the artist, since everything is sculpted. So I thought maybe it might be a little more interesting to look at an actual sculpted piece rather than a soft goods piece. You can see that they've done everything just like the original toy that they possibly could. They've added a little bit more of a design and kind of a fold up there. And then we also have this belt that is exactly like the original, and even in function, it's exactly like the original, where you just kind of poke the little rubber knob through, and then it's just got the little kind of rubber twisties down here, and these are very, very thin, so I would be very careful handling those. On the back, you can see that there's definitely more of an opening area for the tail, which is something that would have served the original figure very well, and we'll get into that with articulation, what all the tail can do. There's lots of tiny little imperfections and rips and tears down here, and I think that this is something that, had the original designers back in the day at Playmates been able to put in the figure, they definitely would have, and it feels very right for this particular design. On the sides, we have the furry arms right here, and we just have the big claws on the hands, very kind of werewolf looking stuff. And then we go down to the legs, we have more of the fur and just kind of the wraps down here, and the big rat feet. On the bottoms, we just have some copyright info and more of those bandage wraps. All that detail continues, and that does it for all of the sculpt and paint work on the figure. Overall, it is a great, great homage visually to that original 1988 Splinter figure. So the figure actually comes packaged with the soft goods robe, and this robe is perhaps a little more on the purple side, but it is totally cloth, and you get this belt. And like I said, it's actually packaged in that, and this is the alternate, but let's just switch that out right now and show you how it works. So like I said, this kind of just clamps in. Now a lot of times this wants to work its way out, but it still stays together very nicely. I usually just put the arms back like so, and we just kind of put them together, and this leads right off. If you want to make this even easier, you can remove the hands from the figure. They just pop right out, so it's not a problem to do that, and the openings are big enough for the arms there to where it's not an issue to get them off without worrying about any kind of damage or anything like that. Before we actually get the Tunic on, we'll have a look at just the regular Splinter body underneath. This is actually very accurate to that original Splinter. A lot of adult collectors probably have a bunch of naked Splinters laying around. That Tunic piece was something that was very, very easy to lose. So this may remind you more of your childhood than the actual Tunic Splinter. Is the back as well. All the sculpting is still very, very strong. All the paint work and everything, nothing is left for granted just because it's covered up by the robe. So that's great that they really went the extra mile on that. Okay, next up, you'll find that this one's very easy to get on because of the cloth nature of it. So once again, we will just put the arms back. And like I said, you can remove those hands and make this even easier if you want, but I don't really find it necessary. So we just put it over like that. Now we have Splinter in his smoking jacket. So what you do next is you just put those together. And I kind of like to leave mine open a little bit right up there if I can. Kind of gives it a more relaxed look. If you don't do that, you kind of get this number right here, and it just looks a little stuffy for me. I really like the gray of the fur up there to actually be visible, because as a kid, I always thought that was a cool like visual feature of that original figure. So I really do kind of work with it and make sure that that's visible. Then you have a couple of options about what you do here. This is just an elastic kind of belt, and it's just got this elastic fabric with it and a really funny belt buckle on the front. This is so that you can lead it through and tighten it if you need to, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. I'll go ahead and get it on the figure, and the easiest way is just to put it over one arm, and it's very, very stretchy, so I'm not too worried when I stretch it out over the rest. Now, for this one, you can either bring it on down, and I'm just going to remove the hand to make it a little easier so it has less to clear, and boom, it's around there. And then you just kind of have to finagle and sort of adjust things as you go. Make sure the belt is facing the right way. Okay, line up the belt around here, and there you have it. We'll get Splinter out of Luke Skywalker mode here and get his hand back on. Spoiler alert for everybody who's not watched Empire Strikes Back. It's only been out for 40 years. Anyway, now that we've got the belt on, that's kind of the look that we have. And like I said, I'm really beside myself about knowing which one is my preferred look, to be quite honest with you. I don't necessarily have a very strong preference either way. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, though, in the comments below. Maybe you guys can help me decide which one that I need to keep it displayed with. The one drawback about this is that if you're going for original action figure accuracy, and I'm a stickler for that, of course, you'll notice that the belt just isn't the same. If they had found a way to get the rounded belt buckle on there like the original has for that kind of rounded look, then that would have been terrific, because the sculpted version actually does have that. You can see it's got the rounded belt buckle right there. But that didn't happen with this. I understand they did want it to be adjustable. I almost sort of want to go in and take an extra one of those belts from the original and just cut off that belt buckle piece and just glue it onto that buckle. I know that sounds kind of crazy, and that would make it a nightmare to remove, but it is something that I've thought about doing. I don't mind it too much, though, like this. It's not really that much of an issue for me. And there is some ways around this. There's definitely some ways to minimize this. You could turn this over like that, and it's less visible that way, but then you have to deal with some other stuff with the strands kind of being upside down. Or you could technically just put that in the back, and it's a little less noticeable, but then you don't have the kind of strands. So it becomes less accurate in one way and more accurate in another. So there's different ways to deal with it. I really think that the simplest thing that Super 7 probably could have done was just make sure that this was black, the buckle itself. And that way it really wouldn't have been that noticeable. It wouldn't have looked so much like a man belt that Splinter is wearing. That, to me, would have been the simplest kind of cure-all solution. Now that we've restored Splinter's dignity by giving him back his gi, let's go ahead and have a look at the articulation. And it's good that we have switched it to this for the articulation, because, of course, this isn't going to inhibit anything like the actual sculpted one might ever so slightly. The head is just on a ball joint. There's no hinges anywhere, which is kind of unfortunate, because you would be able to get a lot more out of it than you can here. It only goes up that much. And I really would have thought that it would have went up a lot more, especially when you kind of have a more of a bestial figure like this. And it really can't go down at all. Instead, its down position is just the straight ahead position. So it's a little disappointing, and it's also maybe a little tight when you get to certain sides up here. So you kind of have to watch out for that. You can go to the sides pretty well, so that's nice. You can get some inquisitive Splinter looks like that. But really, there's not a lot going on at the head. At the shoulders, you have a hinge that can only go up about that far. The hinges aren't very deep at all in the shoulders, so Splinter is not going to be doing too much Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon reenactments or anything like that when it comes to the shoulders. He can, of course, bring his arm all the way around. He does have full rotation, and the thing is, though, that there's elbows sculpted on the sides, and so that means your rotation will end about right there, okay? Now, I have no idea why you would want Splinter to look like he had broken his arm by having a full 360 there, but hey, if it's something you're worried about. We also get a single jointed elbow. Of course, this line is about the single joints, and you don't get a whole lot of range there, but enough to do the kinds of things that Splinter would. I don't imagine you're going to have him doing too much crazy combat stuff and more of the mentor role, so that's just something to be aware of. You also get hinges at all of the different hand sculpts. You can get those slapping hand positions when the turtles act the fool. Shut up. Stop it. But we also get a full rotation, of course, at the wrist. In the chest area, you could see when we had the tunic off earlier that there is a cut right here, and you can rotate that around 360, but with the tunic on, you probably don't want to do that. There's a little bit of wobble, but it's not a tremendous amount. It's nothing to write home about. You're mostly going to be using that as your rotation. Next up, we don't have any rotation at the waist. That's all up here. Now, we do just have hinged hips down here, and they can go up really far, so you can go up about all the way with a kick if you want. Looks pretty cool. That is something he's not inhibited about at all, but he doesn't have any kind of cut up here. This is just it for the hips. So because of that, you're not going to be able to rotate that part. Now to me, it's not too much of a big deal. And why? Because you can rotate this. So there's not really much of a reason to rotate the upper leg, especially if it's being covered by the tunic. So you may say it's a cop-out, but I just don't feel it's necessary. Next, we do get splits, and they are tremendous with those hinges. You can have Splinter split further than any living being, animal or human. All right, next we do get a single joint here, but I actually really like the single joints on these knees. You can actually get quite a good range, and they go up pretty far, and I suppose his more bestial nature is what allows that to happen with the sculpting. Like I said, we get a full rotation right there. We do get a hinge right here, and it's a very, very effective one. You can go way down, you can go way up, and this is probably the best hinge out of the line. We also get some ankle pivot down here. And it's interesting because this has more articulation down here at these ankles than any other figure in the line. So Splinter can do a tremendous amount of different poses. And you can potentially, and I say this, potentially, you should be able to get him doing just about anything. But as you're going to find out, that's easier said than done a whole lot of the times. I mean, like I'm struggling a little bit. There we go. Okay, so yeah, you can get some pretty crazy stuff, but let me explain why this is a little difficult. Check it out. The feet, in order to be a little more anatomically accurate, I suppose, for a rat, you kind of have this number going on, where there's a curvature down, and then it's flattened here. That means you're not going to get a flat-footed stance. It's just not going to happen. He has to stand like this, with balance. So really, what ends up happening is you have two options. You can either stand him, which is the way that I think it probably should be done, and you kind of have to finagle the hips a little bit and kind of get it where you want it, and then have him balance on those flat parts of his feet. Or you can have him balance back on his heels like this, which I think is a little silly because it kind of looks like he's leaning back. Now, you could pose this upper part to where that's not an issue, but then he kind of leans forward. So I definitely think you have to balance it on those front flat parts. But like I said, it leads to some problems because as you're trying to pose him, he kind of does some crazy things. It's one of those deals where you sort of just have to get to know posing the figure. And it works pretty well once you kind of get used to having to work with those flat parts and balancing the figure around those. But really, from the side, you can tell that there's a lot going on here in terms of trying to make it balance and getting the knees just right. That is a complication when you're posing the figure and trying to get him to stand. Something else that could have probably went a ways in alleviating this was maybe if these were a little bit stronger. These hinges here are just a little weak, especially this one over here is a little weak. And I feel like mine would have probably stood a lot easier if not for that hinge being a little weak. And I'll just tell you right now, this is fair warning for anybody with this figure. When it comes to unlocking the pivot like this, I really, really had to work to get this unlocked without it breaking. I had to boil one of them in hot water, and finally I was able to get it. And I thought for sure that that one was going to be a goner, but I put it in the freezer for a while, and that was able to kind of toughen it up to get it to break through whatever paint was stuck in there and causing that problem. So just be aware of that it was not an easy task to get his joints loose. So that was a little disappointing, and it does make posing this figure and balancing him just a little on the iffy side. There's one more additional point of articulation. It's the tail. We have a full rotation where the tail can go around 360. You can get it in all sorts of crazy poses. There's actually a hinge that you can see right there, and that leads to being able to whip the tail in lots of different ways. Up here, we just have a cut that allows the gray part to kind of to rotate independently of the brown. And what's great is that if you need to, you can use the tail for further stabilization when you are posing him up and trying to get him to stand. So that is a neat little bonus for the tail. With this figure and its kind of weak ankles, it's a good thing to be able to have a little extra support, especially for some of your more ambitious poses, because you can do some pretty crazy stuff, and it provides a lot of support for anything crazy you might want to do. So that's a cool option to have. Next up, we'll look at a few accessories that Splinter includes, is the funny little baby turtle accessory. I absolutely love this little guy. I suppose it's meant to be one of the Ninja Turtles as they were a baby when he first started raising them. I really like how they made sure that the plastron down here is the same exact color as the actual turtle plastron. So you got that same exact tone. So there's a little bit of, some kinship here. But it's really funny how the eyes are yellow. So I don't know. Is that an homage perhaps to like one of the accessories from the original line? I mean, usually the accessories weren't painted, so I don't know. But it is really funny how the eyes are yellow. Kind of reminds me of Franklin a little bit here with that facial expression. Does appear to be smiling. Plenty of cool detail on the shell. I really like this little guy. It's a lot of fun. And then definitely a big favorite for a lot of collectors is going to be his bow and arrow here. Now you may notice that I already have a hand on it, and that's because this sucker is pretty hard to get into this hand. As a matter of fact, I strongly suggest that you maybe boil this and put in a little bit of hot water and then try to pose the hand around it. For me, I was impatient and I kind of worked it up through here and then on down to this. Probably not the best idea in terms of durability, but still, it's how I did it. And now I don't really want to get it back off there and have to do all that again, so it's on here. We also have all this cool wood grain sculpting, and there's some really, really nice wash going on here to bring out all those details. I was actually really surprised by the neat amount of black wash that you see on that brings out the wood grain. There's also a really cool wrap and kind of some almost like little buttons or rivets that are right there on the bow, and he does have an elastic band for the bow, so this is great if you want to shoot those arrows. And speaking of that, let's go ahead and get this in his hand. The hands do switch out really nicely. Didn't have any trouble with any of those. Okay, once it's in there, this is how Splinter looks with the bow. You recreate that famous scene from Secret of the Ooze where he saves the turtles. Once again, spoiler alert, if you didn't see the movie back in 1991, you've had a few years to get there. He does come with 3 of these arrows right here, and these are really cool. They're a little warped. You can see that they're well used. I don't know if they'll fly too straight, some of them, but they're slightly warped with a little bit of heat and some cold water afterwards. I'm sure you can kind of get them lined out. But let's just look at one of the straighter ones that we get. Once again, that cool wash is on there with the black, and we have the cool silver tip. So I actually really like this, like the little feathering down here at the end. And it's funny because let's see if it's possible to shoot this thing off. So I'm going to try to, you can see that it's actually sculpted on this end. This is the first time I've tried this. You can see that this end is sculpted with kind of an opening. And I'm pretty sure that is intended to be put in this elastic band. But let's just see if we can make it work. Like I said, I have not tried it. Don't know if it's possible. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That flew like way off. I was actually able to get quite a bit of lift off of that. So pretty good for a box that says, not a toy. I do wish maybe that Splinter had come with a quiver for these guys. That would have been pretty cool. Had a little something to sling on his back and just have a place to store the arrows. That would have been maybe my one ask for an additional accessory. It does come with the ninja throwing stars. He has a couple of them, but that's in line with the originals. Came with a bunch of those ninja throwing stars. He has some fisted hands too if you want him to, punch the shredder right in the kisser. Of course, the shredder's not out yet, but hey, I have only about 1 billion other shredders that I can use in the meantime. He does come with this very cool walking cane, and once again, we have that very winning combination of the tone that they used of the brown plastic and that black wash. It kind of gives it almost like a mahogany feel slightly. We can just take that and put it in the standard hand, just the grip hand. Goes right in. And this is probably how I'm going to leave him displayed, I would say, with the walking cane and the bow. I really like that. Looks pretty cool. And that way you've got Splinter with his most essential accessories, in my opinion. Splinter also comes with another sort of cane, and in my head anyway, at least when I was a kid, I always said that this was like Splinter's secret walking cane, to where when he's out, just like in the days of old, some of these guys would have those canes that actually had a surprise in them in case there was trouble. So you can see that you can actually remove this part, and you actually have a blade down here. So I really like this. It's a very, very lethal option for Splinter. This is when he is walking Central Park late at night. Gotta have some protection, Splinter. Here's a cool accessory that I really like, and I'll be honest with you, it may actually be my favorite accessory that he includes. I absolutely love this. It is just a cup of hot tea, and they did this great translucent smoke effect, kind of steam coming from the tea. Really love that light blue cup there. Really nice. You can put it in several of the different hands. I just had it in the regular grip hand and kind of put the thumb through it to hold it up like that. I think it looks pretty cool that way. There's also a couple of other options in terms of hands. We do get this, which is kind of a more open hand, which I would think is more for like martial arts posing. But it is possible to kind of make him hold the cup using that hand. So let me just show you what that would look like. We'll switch out the hand real quick. We do get two of these open palm kind of hands. And like I said, I think it's more of a gathering his chi kind of thing that you would see Splinter do in the cartoon and things. Like that. But technically, you can also fit that mug in there. And it's kind of iffy because some of the fingers have to be flexed a little to get it in. But once you do, it actually looks pretty cool. I like the steam coming off of it. Splinter when he's just kind of chilling at the sewer lair, I suppose. And this kind of begs the question, can Splinter like do any kind of setting pose? Regular setting for a chair would be no problem, as you can see like that. But can he like cross his legs like he's meditating? Well, I don't know. I've not actually tried it. That's pretty decent. It actually looks pretty nice. I actually like that one a lot. We do get a weapons sprue, and this of course is meant to simulate the ones that we would get with the old figures. I really think these are neat, but I'm not actually sure that I'll actually get any of the weapons off of this thing, so hopefully none of them will actually get torn off. But it does suffer from the same design flaw that Raphael's did. If their intention is for you to stand this up using this base stand right here, then you really shouldn't be putting any accessories on the bottom because it just falls over. So it's not something that you want to have to do, constantly mess with that and try to get it right. At least I don't want to. So I'm probably just going to lay it down, or even worse, just put it back in the box and really not utilize it. So that's a shame. The only thing you can do is pretty much just prop it in the back, and I'm not sure that that's the intention. Now, needless to say, I do understand, of course, why they did it like that. Because I feel like they're trying to make it more accurate to the weapons placement that was on those original figures, but still something for them to keep in mind in the future. Last accessory he comes with are these open hands that are more of like karate chop hands, so they're a cool little alternative for Splinter. Alright, time to do a few scale comparisons with old Splinter here, and of course, the very first scale comparison we need to do, in case anybody has skipped to this portion of the video, is with the original Splinter figure. Great to see these two guys together, and I think they look so terrific, especially now that we have the kind of soft goods tunic on there. Earlier, we noted that the tunic on the sculpted version, on the sculpted tunic that this guy includes, we noted that it was maybe a little more red, but now it's actually a little more purple than the original. So this is exactly in between the two tones. Just to kind of show my point a little bit more, I'll bring out the sculpted tunic as well. You can see that somewhere between these two is the exact color, at least on mine, where it's a little faded, and I'm sure everybody's looks slightly different based on wear and tear. This is my childhood Splinter figure, so it's seen a lot of love over the years. I'm shocked I still have the belt and the tunic. And of course, one comparison we need to make is how does this guy scale up with the standard turtle body? And so we'll bring out Raphael, the only one that has come out so far, and they scale perfectly together. It's exactly the kind of size difference you would expect between these two, where Raphael is probably a good foot taller, I would say, he's a good foot taller than Splinter, and so they look terrific together. Very nice. Next up, to bring out a more monstrous figure, is the standard Baxter Stockman release, and of course he's the exact same sculpt as the blue Bug Zapper glow-in-the-dark version that we had around SDCC, so, there's not going to be any difference between them scale-wise or sculpt-wise. but you can see that Stockman is huge, so he really dwarfs Splinter, which it was not the case with the original figures. The original figures, they would have been a little more close to that same height, but a lot of that has to do with Stockman's legs being so squat on the original release, and if you really squat him down, and if you get him to more of how the sculptors designed him to be static posed, you can see that it's much more accurate to that original toy. But I don't know about you, but my feeling or my habit seems to be to pose him up to where almost where he's walking a little too tall. So I kind of have to get out of that mindset if I want him to be accurate to the original figure, but they look great together. Next up, we also have him beside of the Foot Soldier from the line. And the Foot Soldier is really, really, really tall. And so it makes me wonder exactly how tall like Shredder is going to be in this line, because this guy's big. And I have the Foot Soldier kind of squatted down into his toy pose for this. So even like that, he's like 2 feet taller than Splinter. So in toy scale, I suppose. Now, if I were to straighten the legs out, kind of get his posture going, because we're going to say that he finally got treatment for his back problems that the original figure clearly had. See, he's so scared that the baby turtle ran off. You can see that he's way up there. So it is funny, but I'll tell you what, I really like that, though, that he's that much bigger than Splinter. I think it's a neat visual. I really do enjoy that. It'll be really fun to have a Shredder that's that much bigger, so it'll be really cool to see them side by side. All right, now it's time to go through history with our Splinters. And I actually, believe it or not, don't own that many Splinter action figures. In my last video review, you could see that I had a huge, gargantuan collection of Raphaels, and even more that I didn't even bring in for comparisons in the video. But for Splinter, it's a really different story. It's not for not loving Splinter or anything like that. Let's go ahead and bring in the movie star Splinter. And just as I said earlier, a self-fulfilling prophecy, here he is, a naked Splinter, because Playmates was all about those soft goods, robes, and yes, here he is, a naked Splinter figure, as most every collector has in their collection at some point. It's pretty funny to see these guys together. I still think it's amazing that the flocking is still on this guy and it hasn't really come off, so good for you, Playmates. And the next Splinter I have is from Ninja Turtles Fast Forward. I've always liked this Splinter to go with my 2003 Turtles more, because it's so much of a more refined design. Those first Splinter figures they released in that series always looked a little wonky to me compared to the actual cartoon design, so I've always liked this one. Pretty cool figure, one of my favorite Splinter figures actually. And one of my favorite comparisons to make is with NECA's movie Splinter from the 1990 movie. And these guys look so cool together. I love seeing this kind of comparison here, where it just tickles my brain in a funny way, because you have to imagine, when we were little and the movie came out, I watching it on VHS constantly, we had this Splinter figure, and to us, it was this guy. So in the end, is Splinter another hit for Super 7 and their new line of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Ultimates figures? I believe he is. Splinter is a really, really great new addition, and he really helps round out an incredibly varied first wave of Ninja Turtles figures. As a matter of fact, this must be one of the most varied waves I've ever seen of any toy line, especially for a first wave. And I just think that he really does invoke that original Splinter figure so well, and he really does just a consistent job, just like Raphael did, of capturing that original spirit of the toy. So if you're a big Turtles fan like me, and this figure is something that really puts you in that same mind of that original figure, then I say definitely go for it. There's a couple of things to watch out for, of course. We do have a little bit of kind of some weak ankles, I would say. And it can definitely result in Splinter being a little more challenging to pose than some of the others, but that's kind of the sacrifice, I suppose, for having this much amount of articulation, where there's just so many different things that you can do. And I think that it's great that he has those points, but it does make him a little more complicated than some of the others in this first wave. The other thing to consider is that you kind of have two options here. You have the technically more accurate cloth tunic. Then I suppose that the sculpted option kind of has a more accurate belt. So it's just sort of a matter of figuring out which way you want to go on that. It's great to have both options, and I'm very, very pleased that they did that for us. I also really like the accessories with this guy, and I think that once again they've proven that they're very dedicated to painting the accessories and making sure that they look right so that no detail is overlooked. And for the price, that's what you should be getting. I mean, let's be honest, these aren't cheap even in the least. For a figure that is essentially costing you somewhere between $45 or $50, depending on where you get them and when you get them, and always pre-order early because those prices are always bound to go up, then you should be getting the very best product that you can possibly get. And I do think that Splinter lives up to that in many, many, many ways, but there's also some definite room for improvement, particularly when it comes to some of the articulation. I noted that in the head, it would have been great if he'd been able to do a few other things that I think would have sort of taken the figure to the next level. And so it's those kinds of things that hold it back from being, you know, the absolute perfect recommendation, especially at that price point. These are very expensive, but as the box enjoys touting, these apparently aren't toys, even though they sure seem to be. But because of that, I suppose that they're very much aimed at that collector's market, and particularly the people like me, you know, between 30 and 40 years old, who really grew up with these figures and really have some great appreciation for them. I'm so glad that it exists, and I really do think that overall it turned out really terrific. So guys, that's all for me. Of course, you want to keep your eyes on this channel so that you can check out all of the Super 7 Ninja Turtles Ultimate reviews that I have coming up, including reviews for these guys as well back here. So please keep your eye on the channel, and of course subscribe. We are trying to hit that mythical 1,000 subscriber count. We do appreciate all the help we can get, and we appreciate each and every subscriber that joins the channel. We also ask that you like the video if you enjoyed it, and of course post a comment down below. Which one do you think is better? Or would you pose Splinter with the cloth tunic or the plastic tunic? Let us know down below. Anyway though guys, this has been Jared from Fanboys Forever signing out, and God bless you, take care, be safe out there, and I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Cowabunga.